All right, well, good afternoon. My name is Bevan Boss. I'm a faculty member in the EC department, and Khaled Abdel Ghaffar and I are the co-organizers of today's panel, who will be discussing COVID-19 and its positive impact on industry. So I'd like to highlight two of the points of this topic that here we are 2 years into this pandemic, often thinking of the negative aspects, and today we're going to focus on positive outcomes. And secondly, we're focused on industry. So we all know that work environments are changing rapidly, of course, during the pandemic, and we expect some of these changes to linger. And we'd like to hear from our panelists, their thoughts on how this plays out and how they see it playing out. So I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists with brief bios. You can read more about their interests and accomplishments on the ECExpo webpage. And we've also been having some troubles with internet connectivity, and I see all four panelists here now. So, okay, hopefully we'll stay that way, but let's keep our fingers crossed. All right, so I'll go ahead and introduce all four. And I'll take these in alphabetical order, which will also be the order that they will speak in the opening session, opening part of our panel. First is Jin Baines. He's currently Director of Avionics and Solutions Engineering at Amazon Kuiper, which is the well-known satellite communications project. He previously worked at Facebook, serving as head of satellite and cellular connectivity, and also at National Instruments, where he served as vice president of R&D, RF, and wireless products. He earned a BS in electrical and computer engineering from UC Davis and an MS in EE from Stanford. Hope Bovenzi is a staff product manager for AC charging at Tesla. Previous to Tesla, she worked at Astera Labs, where she was head of marketing and hardware product management. Prior to that, she spent 9 years at Texas Instruments, where she directed a global team of product system managers for automotive infotainment. She earned her BS at UC Davis in electrical engineering and an MBA at UCLA. Ken Dyer is principal analog design engineer at Microsoft, currently working on custom analog and mixed signal circuit design, supporting HoloLens as well as other Microsoft silicon. Previous employers included Rambus, where he was director of architecture, Semtech, where he was engineering director, Intersil, and Intel. He received his PhD in 1998 from UC Davis. Kathy Liu is a distinguished engineer at Broadcom, currently leading the SerDes architecture and modeling group. Previously, she worked as R&D director and distinguished engineer at Avago LSI. Since 2002, she has been working on high-speed transceiver solutions. Her technical interests are in signal processing, forward error correction, and modeling in high-speed optical and electrical transceiver solutions. She earned her PhD at the University of Hawaii. So the way our panel is going to flow is we're going to begin with each panelist presenting a 5-minute, giving a 5-minute presentation, and then after that we'll open the session to questions and answers. For those of you in the audience, please write your questions in the Q&A section of your Zoom client. We will hear from our panelists in alphabetical order, as I mentioned. Jin, would you please start us out?
Sure, thanks, Bevan. So I don't have any slides. If I had any interest in making slides, I would have been disinclined by my Amazon culture, which is a slide-free environment. So I'm gonna just talk for a few moments here. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel and for the very nice introduction. I'm very grateful to be part of UC Davis. It's been a part of my life in a significant way and my career. As mentioned, I'm currently at Amazon on the Kuiper project, which is a program to launch over 3,000 really highly advanced low Earth orbit satellites in the coming years. So you'll hear more about that as we go. And we just actually did have a news announcement about a huge launch rocket contract that we just signed, the biggest ever, I believe. And so that's a big deal for what we're doing in the program. I joined Amazon about a year ago in the middle of COVID. And what's amazing is how time has really seemed to have been warped by COVID. It feels like a century ago since we went into the lockdown. It's been an incredible period of change for the entire world and very challenging for so many of us across the entire world. That's not what this panel is about, of course, so I won't dwell on that here. As they say, every cloud has a silver lining, and even one as large and as dark as COVID certainly does. So in terms of that silver lining, I was thinking about this preparing for the panel, and there are three areas that I'd consider to be positive effects for the industry and for humans in general. The first area that I want to highlight is technology acceleration. Unfortunately, we had some internet connectivity issues here, but let's think about where we were some number of years ago and where we are today. COVID has certainly forced us to advance technology that really allows remote communications in one-on-one and in group sessions. It's hard to understate this effect. So many of us had to start working remotely, and after a quick adjustment period, we had to become efficient and productive, at least as much as we were before COVID. And so these tools were improved to meet the demand, and newly created tools appeared also during the pandemic. There was a lot of big advances in the telco and broadband infrastructure industry also. And beyond what we've seen already in the vastly improved capabilities that we've got, there's a whole bunch more that was spawned or resurrected, as the case may be, such as things like holograms and creation of tools for immersive remote communication. So we'll see more of that as we go. So that's the first area that's positive, technology acceleration, that I'd like to call out. The second positive area is around just reduced travel and commutes. COVID allowed us all to kind of take a stop and a pause from the insane amount of business travel that was happening before. It seemed to me before COVID that people in industry were traveling excessively, and it became sort of just like the norm to jump on a plane, fly to meet people face to face. Some of this was necessary, of course, but a lot of it was wasteful and unnecessary. Also, people that used to have long commutes were able to save gas and save time during this COVID period. So COVID allowed us to all learn how to get our jobs done without the travel and without wasting hours every day or week on a long commute to go into a physical office. This was good for the planet, and it was good for people to spend more time with their families. I think many of us actually became more efficient and productive. We had to manage how we did our work at home. But if we could overcome that, I think a lot of us actually became more productive. And I think you can see that in the growth of industry. We adapted and we made it work for the better. The third and last area I want to call out before I hand off is around just what I call human resilience and creativity. What happened was that we had an opportunity to demonstrate the resilience of the human race. Our response was certainly not perfect, and the overall response across the world could have been better in some ways, but it also at the same time showed that as a race that we are able to overcome something that has a potential to destroy us. The speed that we developed the various vaccines and medical treatments for COVID was amazing. I'm still shocked that it happened as fast as it did. In fact, nobody believed it would. So it was done faster than ever before. We found a way to address the threat, and it was obviously at some cost, but we proved that we're an extremely resilient society and a race. And we also became more inventive as part of this process. We had to figure out new ways of doing things, and this is the creativity part of this. People in industry started finding new solutions to enhance our lives in this environment. This sort of mentality and human character, resilience and creativity is something that I would say is inspirational, shows itself in industry also. As we continue, as companies continue to be more creative as we go, as sort of this response that happened towards COVID, but it created this resilience, this view of resilience, this character resilience, hardened that, and this ability to be more creative. So these three areas: technology acceleration, the first one; reduced travel and commutes, the second one; and then this demonstration of human resilience and creativity, the third one. I think they've all had a huge positive effect on industry and on the world in general. So with that, thank you, and I'll pass it back to Bevan for the next speaker.
Very good. Thank you, Jin. Hope?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Hope Bavenzi, and I currently work at Tesla as a product manager for AC charging. And I really loved what Jin just talked about with tech acceleration, reduced travel, commuting, human resiliency, and creativity. And I see a lot of overlap in what I was thinking about as I was preparing for this panel as well. A couple of overlaps that I see is really home life and the focus and the refocus that I think we found with COVID and working from home. In addition to identifying even from a career or life goals, like what is really important to each of us, which I'll touch upon a little bit. And that's the third thing that I think is really important that we've come out of COVID with is accessibility for those that may not have had the same accessibility or resources that they did pre-COVID. And to explain some of these three things, I'm going to just share an anecdote, my personal anecdote, and what my journey was transitioning from pre-COVID to COVID and now navigating to this point during the pandemic. For me, in 2019, as Bevan mentioned, I got my MBA from UCLA, and I was working at Texas Instruments. I was traveling globally, like Jin mentioned, hopping on a plane every week, to be honest. And it was getting to the point of about 50% of my time was spent traveling to various locations around the world. And part of this was also for my MBA too. And what I find interesting was my MBA was actually hybrid, online and in person. And I want you to remember that in a little bit too. I graduated with my MBA, and a few months later, COVID hit. I was actually in China when the news broke out that there was some sort of virus that was starting to spread. And from there, a few months later, in March of 2020, we were all homebound. And for me, as I had done my MBA at UCLA, and I had this hybrid program where I was flying down to UCLA every couple of weeks and then doing the rest of my program actually online. I already had my home setup ready to go with computer screens, and was pretty efficient at working from home. Simultaneously, my team, when I was at Texas Instruments, was actually globally distributed. My boss was in Germany. I had people on my team that reported to me in China, people that were based in Dallas. And something that I thought was really helpful was just knowing how to collaborate globally prior to the pandemic. But something that really stuck out to me and really affected me personally was the lack of accessibility. Because for me, I actually have a hereditary hearing loss. I wear hearing aids, and it is always been a challenge throughout my life just to be able to participate, even in classes, online, something that I really ran into when I was pre-pandemic, for example, with my teammates in Texas, was I would be in meetings with a bunch of folks in who are in Texas in a conference room, and I had a really hard time hearing them. And what happened during the pandemic was everyone was able to join online, was participating online. And I was actually able to start participating more and was able to follow conversations more because it was a lot more accessible for me, especially with tools like Microsoft Teams, with Zoom that actually have subtitles. And so I think that accessibility is something that has been a really big movement for folks that didn't necessarily have the capability or the resources before the pandemic. So adding on to the, what's really important to you, home life balance, travel, accessibility, I think has been a huge aspect and a huge positive thing that's come out of the pandemic.
Very good. Well, thank you, Hope. Thank you for sharing that. Next, Ken.
Okay, let me try and share here. If I can find the right window. Share. All right, so my name's Ken Dyer, and today I'm going to be talking to you about something good that I think that happened through COVID, which was the evolution of Microsoft Teams and its accessibility, as Hope just talked about. I joined Microsoft in 2019. The thing that attracted me to Microsoft was I kind of wanted to get away from the circuits that I was designing before. This was inspired in part by our department chair, Andre. Big influence in my life, UC Davis. I really appreciate the professors and everybody working over there to make such a great program. It's been a huge impact in my life along with the IEEE. Now, you might be wondering, what's an analog circuit designer doing at Microsoft? And so let me see if I can go to the next slide. So Microsoft had this issue with very large projects. In fact, I think this is the right slide. Sorry. So silicon design at Microsoft is involved in custom, large, complex programs. Microsoft has a lot of people doing a lot of things. We have over 180,000 people that needed to be productive during the time of COVID. We got this program, and you can see there's a picture here on this helmet of this Army helmet that we got with the Army. It's called the Integrated Visual Augmentation System. And this is an example of a complicated program at Microsoft. This we got before the pandemic occurred. So we signed the deal with the Army before the pandemic. We didn't know the pandemic was going to happen. We had to get everybody to work together and be productive. In other words, to build this complex integrated visual augmentation system, which is an augmented reality helmet, kind of like Call of Duty, but for the Army, the soldier's head. It allows you to see things in the environment. It allows you to see through fog, see at night. It allows you actually, if you have building plans, to see through walls. And so it gives our soldiers a keen advantage in a very dangerous environment. So what's interesting about this program is it has many people involved. The US Army and Microsoft has a multidisciplinary team of members in California, Washington, North Carolina. This is where the silicon and all the software was developed. And in Europe is the optics that's on the man's head. Also, it includes design, manufacturing, since it's a US military product. The manufacturing has to be done within the United States. And so we had to build a manufacturing facility within the United States during this time and coordinate that. There's also validation testing and groups that are involved in those. So how do we do that? Well, we decided to employ teams, Microsoft Teams, to collaborate with everybody. Teams in 2019, if you might remember, you might not remember it because it was Zoom back in 2019. That was the big deal. It was easy accessibility. So in other words, things had to happen. And Microsoft came together. We all came together. Part of the reason I'm showing these things, it turns out the silicon that I'm involved in and help out in is involved with everything on this page. So Microsoft Teams is the first part on the bottom. We understand what that is. It's like a Zoom type of tool. That combined with the artificial intelligence solutions, I work on chips for the back ends inside the fabric of the AI solutions. We build those custom chips within Microsoft. I work on the display parts, the display silicon that goes inside the helmet. And also we combine the Microsoft Azure, which is the world's computer. You can combine these all things to make a very powerful version of Teams that is, and we'll talk more about it in detail here. So what was going on with Teams at the beginning? Well, at the beginning of 2019, Teams was behind Zoom, arguably. I don't think it was really good. Zoom caught us all off guard because it was very accessible. You can just download it and use it. So what Microsoft did is they banned the use of Zoom and Skype and WebEx. And all the employees were basically became Teams development. We all became part of the Teams team, improving the software during the pandemic. We included cloud-powered services behind Teams to enable features in Office 365 and Word and PowerPoint. These features are things that might be beyond the compute capacity of your home computer. So it enables the computer to do that. We employed artificial intelligence to aid in language translation in real time. We also worked together. We observed the use of Teams in many groups within Microsoft and looked at people's different use models. Software designers and hardware designers are different. We all fed this back. So there's all these click buttons on Teams where you can give feedback. So my version of Teams that I use usually is no more than 2 weeks old. It's constantly evolving. So what did we do? Well, again, what Hope said, we enabled real-time subtitles generated from conversation in meetings. It has the ability now to translate subtitles in real time. There can be up to 3 languages different spoken simultaneously. From these conversations, Teams will automatically generate transcripts, which are searchable and contains also roll call information. You have the ability to go back and search what someone said. Teams also can identify speakers and translate for the deaf. It supports cameras for sign language and teletype. Teams also has skins to help people who are colorblind or have limited visual acuity. It has the ability to read alternative text and readers for the visually impaired. It has the ability to check accessibly with an Office 365. You'll see an icon in the upper right-hand corner, which we've now added to the Microsoft tools, which allow you to check the accessibility of your program. This presentation has gone through that, and it passes, by the way. The ability to interact with virtual whiteboards was included, and even the ability to take over another person's PC for assistance. So I can actually take over somebody's layout or circuit design or help someone run simulations. The ability to interface tools with those with limited mobility was also included. And this is for people with physical disabilities. Straws, for example, if you have limited ability to use your hands or arms, you can use a straw and it will track your eye on the screen. So you can click and use Microsoft without having the ability to move your arms. There are also hotkeys available that allow you to do things very quickly. And the cameras now can track users. So as Hope said, and I agree with her, that what's come out of this pandemic is the improvement in accessibility in collaboration software. And so I think if we had to do it again, including UC Davis and their experience with Zoom and everything, I think will be a lot better. These improvements in productivity software in terms of accessibility are here to stay and benefit everybody. And that's all I had.
Very good. Thank you, Ken. Kathy?
So let's go with these slides. I think as a service designer or the networking semiconductor engineer, I would like to focus on how the COVID-19 impact to the networking semiconductor industry and also to the individual like myself. Since the COVID start and everybody start from working from home, school from home, socialize from home, and exercise and watching movie from home. All of those create the data and traffic explosion. And probably most of us experienced internet speed issues here and there since March 2020. And so how to solve this data and traffic explosion issues is fall into our networking semiconductor industry responsibility. At least we are one of the solution solver. So on the top of the COVID-19's high demanding on the networking, also the like a 5G or 6G traffic and machine learning, AI, computing load on the top, ID more demanding for the bandwidth and high-speed connectivities within the data center. Here is just an example. The left-hand side is inside Google's data center. And you can see on the right-hand side, the top two plots. The chart is data center traffic, and then the AI machine learning's computing load has significantly increased within the last decades, 10 years. And the same thing happened to the Facebook Meta's data center, like the two charts below. And I think this is the same thing. The trending will continue going on, even before, during, and after pandemic. It continued going up, the trending. It will happen to others, mega data center as well. I believe Microsoft or Amazon, the data center probably facing the same high demanding on the bandwidth growth. So then as the semiconductor company, Broadcom networking Swiss chip has been the industry leader, and we can review what happened for our flagship chip, Tomahawk, the Switch flagship chip. And then from 10 years ago, it started from 10 gig speed lanes, and then 64 lanes per chip, and then all the way go up to Tomahawk 4, and has 256 lanes, and each lane has 100 gigs. So we double the speed and then bandwidth every 2 years. And then now we already deliver our Tomahawk 5, and then like an architect, I already study and start our project for Tomahawk 6, which is 100 T bandwidth capacity. So that is the whole groups in the company and the whole industry working hard to solve this data traffic, the traffic jam problem. Okay. So then as come out with what's the impact of COVID-19, right? For the industry, the higher demanding for networking and AI machine learning bandwidth, and really bring the positive impact or benefit to the industry and my company. And you can see the revenue go up, and the booking demanding is up, and then even you can see from the stock price is go really very good in the last 2 years. And also as the chip makers have to continue sharpening our strategy, long-term strategy. And then this is also require collaborations between the different vendors and partners and customers as well. But I'm happy to see instead of get impact by the COVID-19, for the engineer like us, we have a more resource access actually and tighten collaborations. What is that? Is, for example, there's a lot of, even though we cannot travel, but there's more virtual conference and webinars and workshops, tutorials online available to everyone, like IEEE and OIF, those standard bodies developed long-term hybrid mode, not require everybody have to travel to certain the hotel, certain room, and we have the hybrid mode enabled. And a lot of famous, popular technical conference like DesignCon, ICC, and OFC, they also developed the experience for the virtual and hybrid, and make it a lot of, make more engineers can access to those too. And also is when we have, crossed different locations, size within the company, when we have the meetings together, there's a better connections, even through, Webex, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Google Meet. Those tools can be available to us. For myself, I didn't see any broken points to access more materials and collaborations, chance, opportunities. And also as the industry, the companies pay more attention to the health and the safety to the engineers. So I think we have, better work-life balance through less commute times and more flexible hours. So my takeaway is semiconductor industry has emerged stronger during and after the COVID-19 crisis. Yeah, that is my part.
Well, very good. Thank you, Kathy. Right. Thank you all panelists for your opening statements. I'd like to move to a question. Whichever of you would like to answer, please feel free to jump in, no particular order. The first one is, if you could please comment on the long-term effects of companies allowing employees to work remotely and employees then moving a long distance from their employer.
I can certainly comment on that one, Bevan. I think that my view is that overall it's resulted in people being more productive with the remote accessibility. I think that all of these the way that these comms tools have played out, I think they've become what I would call the term I use is a great equalizer. It's what Hope talked about, right? It's taken away that sort of home court advantage that you used to have if you were physically at the home location. So I think this is good overall. It actually makes it that more voices are heard, more diverse perspectives can be shared. Used to be, if you're on a phone line calling into a remote meeting, it was a massive disadvantage. Now I think we've learned how to make that not a disadvantage. I think the fact that there's going to be a lot of companies with people working remotely, that will continue to equalize that effect, which I think is good overall.
Yeah, to add on to what Jen said, I think that with what we've learned during COVID and being remote, in addition to, I think, folks finding the benefits of not having to commute and also identifying what's really important, valuing time with family and friends more than commuting. And the impact that that's had on this quote unquote the great resignation. I think that there's a lot of power that employees have as companies are really starting to evaluate, do we need to require everyone to come into work all the time? Can we work with hybrid? Can we actually get by with remote work? And the potential cost savings that companies could benefit from, in addition to just the happier and healthier employees that can take advantage of remote work. I really think that the future will be in hybrid, and definitely pushing more towards the remote side, coming in when necessary. I think it's been mentioned a number of times, like from a travel standpoint, what's necessary for traveling and what's necessary for being in the office. I think that's been a really big evaluation, and having time in the office to meet with colleagues and stuff is beneficial sometimes, but not all the time. And I think that's something that we've learned during COVID.
Yeah, maybe I'll add a little bit, which was we were very productive. I worked on 5 different tapeouts while on COVID, and the rate of chip tapeouts actually increased for us. So there was a lot of overhead traveling going back and forth, and that was eliminated, and it was really productive. So a very productive time for us over this pandemic on account of this.
All right, so I may add a different angle for this answer to this question. Since my company, Broadcom, has only one or very few companies to ask the employee go back to the office from very early on. And since 2020 is June, July, the company asked the employee engineers go back to the office, work in the office since then to now. I think it's, I would like to, say maybe there's a trade-off between like you go work from home or everybody in the office. And however, I don't have that opportunity. So I have been in the office 5 days a week, and then with everybody else in the office areas for more than a year. So for me, it doesn't change at all. The COVID-19 to my work and lifestyle is every day go to the office for a long time already. So maybe it's other panelists that have the good angles work from home, but for myself, no, not too much.
All right, interesting perspectives. I think we have time for one more question. So related to that of employees working remotely, how about the personal aspect in terms of having, well, I think we talked about, or you talked about being productive, but how about having enjoyable working relationships with coworkers, managers, subordinates?
Well, I'd like to make a comment on that one. I'm an extrovert by nature, and I really like talking to people and getting involved and dealing with people. And from the personal relationships, what I noticed is that the relationships that I had with my direct teammates that I worked with on a regular basis actually was very good, in many cases improved. However, with other people that I worked with, I didn't see very often, say test people or people in the lab, it wasn't quite as good. And the other thing, which was a challenge, is that sometimes you get ideas just walking down the hall. Sometimes you're talking with somebody and they have a good idea, and then you combine it with your idea, and then you invent something new or create something. So in that regard, the personal working relationships, I said, to me, it's mixed, some good and some bad.
I agree with Ken. And then each one has a pro and a con, but I would highlight that depends what the level of your career stage, right? And for the senior people, we know how to work and manage times, and then also know what is our peers, what they're doing and what the collaboration is needed, information to share, something like that. But for the new graduate and very entry levels engineer, I think it's very essential for them to have office groups time experience to build up the good kind of a habit, and also the thinkings, how to work with as a team in the, at least in the hardware industry, like I personally view.
Yeah, this is actually pretty interesting because for me, my perspective actually changed. At the beginning of COVID, I was at Texas Instruments and had a remote team anyway. And to me, I think going into the pandemic, I was like, I don't really see the need of going back into the office because there's no one in the office that I need to be directly working with all the time. But now that I'm at a company that really needs that in-person collaboration sometimes, I think that my relationship, it's been very beneficial to go into the office and build that relationship, and especially ramping up during COVID, it has been really good to benefit from a foundational in work collaboration. And so before, or at the beginning of COVID, and even towards the middle of it, I was thinking that I don't think I ever need to go back into the office, to be honest. And I actually have really found that going into the office sometimes has improved my relationships with my my colleagues, my managers, my directors, and it's been a very interesting shift. But at the same time, I go in maybe once or twice a week at the most. And the other 3 days, I don't have to commute. I get to spend time with my dogs and my husband, or catch my friends after work or something like that. So I think that a hybrid model does really help both build the relationships with your colleagues, but maintain relationships with your friends and family at home.
I think just to add a little comment on this particular question, Bevan, it's really interesting hearing the different perspectives here. And I'm with Hope in terms of this, your view changes over time. So I'm mostly in the camp of like a hybrid model works best. But I think to the point Kathy was making, it depends, right? It depends on like what kind of work you do. If you're very hardware intensive, you may need to be on, in the physical office a lot more. It depends on the nature of the work. It depends on where you are in your career. I remember while I was at Facebook, one of the things was like remote work was going to become an option for everybody except for new grads. They were actually going to have them come in for the first couple of years so that they could actually have that physical on-site experience. I don't know where they are now since I've left there, but that was an interesting concept. But I think what ultimately it turns into for me is that there's going to be a lot more options. There's a lot more range of ways to do this. So where it used to be a model, and they were pretty constrained models, now I think there's a lot more models. The tools are more capable. So I think we'll find like you can use different models depending on what your work is, what your company is, where you are in your career. All of this is good. I think this is all goodness that came out of this whole process. It just opened up the range of ways of working. So that's my sense on it.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for your comments. We have just a minute for a quick comment on one last question. So if companies are allowing people to work online, remotely, hybrid, et cetera, with all the freedom and flexibility, are they also expected to be available 24/7? So your coworkers are checking their email at 11 p.m. Are people going to start expecting replies at 11 p.m.? Have any quick comments on that?
I honestly don't think so, Bevan. I think this is also part of this, like where you are in your career. Like I'll say for myself, like, I will turn off when I need to turn off. I see people all across Amazon, other companies too, turn off notifications. They're in sleep mode. Even those different tools like Slack and those, you'll see that the person is not active in a certain period. So I think it'll be, again, different company to company. And but I do think that the individual has a lot of control as to how they want that to work out.
Yeah, Jim, yeah, go ahead, Hope.
I was just going to add on to that and say, I think that with any aspect of your career, you're going to have to set boundaries. And I think that once we started to, once we got to the day and age of computer only, having a smartphone and access on every device all the time, that time and that creep into your life outside of the typical 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, like that was going to happen. I think COVID, especially at the beginning, exacerbated this idea of like, well, you're nowhere else. We know that. So we're just going to set, these meetings at any point in the day. And it's our responsibility to set those boundaries. And it's going to vary from team to team, person to person, manager to manager, company to company. And at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to set our own boundaries and stick to our boundaries. And that's what I encourage folks to do.
Yeah, I wanted to add that what Microsoft did is we made meeting-free Fridays. So now you can't schedule meetings on Fridays. And the other thing is that initially, I agree with you, Hope, there was a big rush to get a hold of everybody. But then again, the productivity at least increased. I actually saw us getting more done. And it was easier to turn off the meetings. Plus, honestly, after spending all week looking at a screen, the last thing you want to do is look at the screen some more. So I think in some ways that helped reduce it. So at the beginning of the pandemic, Hope, I agree, it was starting to get out of control, but now it's actually better than it was than before the pandemic, I think.
Yeah, I will add on is this life and work balance. I don't think it's matter too much about the pandemic. Before, if you have the problem with you have 24 hour 7 issues, and you may start from pre-pandemic, right? So I think that is something discipline, but not only for the individual engineer, it has to be the culture of the company itself and your groups, organizations, and your manager. So that is the ecosystem. I hope is, everybody just pay attention to that, because the sustainable, the very popular word sustainable, right? The healthy working experiment, it is require some discipline.
Well, very good. Well, thank you all for sharing your personal stories as well as your wisdom and perspectives. And I'd like to thank you all for your time, and as well from the audience. And that wraps up our panel session. So I'd like to hand things over to Billy, who's going to take on the next section. Thank you so much.